name is Lynn, Elliott-Harding, and I'm a registered nurse in private practice in Oakland. I'm also on the steering committee of Stop the Spray East Bay, and I represent sort of several different viewpoints. The first one is that I'm one of thousands of people who responded on a grassroots level to this problem and became sort of accidental activists, people who weren't necessarily involved in an anti-pesticide movement before this. I'm also the daughter, granddaughter, great-granddaughter of farmers. So I'm shocked to find that the role of CDFA and the Farm Bureau, which I've grown up seeing as supporting farmers, is not advocating for them in the way that I think they should be at a federal level or state level. That we're on somehow opposite sides of this is not understandable to those of us who are consumers of the produce and feel like we're really joined with the farmers themselves in this issue, because we recognize that the quarantines for them are draconian and inappropriate. I'm also the mother of a teenager with asthma, which is one of the original reasons I got involved in this, because my 16-year-old son said to me, if we live in a democracy, how can the government spray poison over our heads without permission? And I knew that I had to get involved. Also, as a registered nurse, which is a science-based field, I need to look at the bigger picture on this too. The environmental, and I'm just going to reference one study, but the environmental working group in 2004 did what they call the 10 Americans study, which you can find on YouTube referenced. They randomly selected 10 cord blood samples, so infant blood samples, and found in those 10 samples 287 industrial chemicals in these unborn children, including pesticides, including DDT, which was discontinued 30 years ago. So what we're looking at is increased cancer rates, incredible impacts even in the parts per billion in their effects on the health of our children and our grandchildren. And I think we have to look at this, especially when we're talking about spraying pesticides, splat, which includes the pyrethrins that they were just talking about, and the impacts on our children, our grandchildren, the generations that follow us, particularly when a program has absolutely been shown to be unnecessary to begin with. And I think it's my profound hope that the CDFA is going to listen to you, because their listening to us has been very much like today. They just haven't shown up. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jane Kelly. I am also a member of Stop the Spray East Bay Steering Committee, and I was going to talk about just one aspect of this program, but I did want to now just address the comment made by the gentleman from the Farm Bureau to say that the EIR is thorough. And he's an attorney. I am not, although I am actually married to one. There is a colorful term in the legal profession that I've heard, and that is tainted fruit of the poisonous tree. And I think it applies here. What it means is that any decision or course of action that follows from a false premise is likely to be wrong. And I would suggest to you that the EIR is based on two flawed assumptions. First of all, that the LBAM is a recent arrival. It is not. And secondly, that it can be eradicated. It cannot. So I just wanted to address the comment made by that gentleman. I also, in listening to the comments about OIHA and about the whole health issue, I attended a meeting in Reedley, California, hosted by the CDFA. It was in the farm community. And the CDFA was always accompanied by somebody from OIHA. During the discussions and sort of the back and forth, the representative from OIHA claimed that there was nothing at all harmful in the pesticide that was sprayed over our friends and colleagues in Santa Cruz and Monterey, even though it was sprayed in plastic particles that could be inhaled. When we challenged that statement, we met outside the meeting room afterwards, and we decided we would engage in a written dialogue. This is actually the written dialogue. It's 28 messages over the course of 3 months. Most of them are from me requesting responses. The last response I had was August of 2008, that is, in which I was told that I would be receiving the final answer by the end of the month. I'm still waiting. So when we talk about losing trust in our agencies, I think this is a pretty clear record, and if anyone would like it,
yeah, we may have a copy of that.
Oh yes, I'd be glad to provide it to you. In fact, I can leave it here.
Sorry.
One of the, thank you. One of the other things I just wanted to talk about is I wanted to speak to this, very briefly, to this very expensive propaganda campaign being waged by the CDFA. The recent TV ads and website are in fact just another scare tactic. And they are, in my opinion, a continuation of the gross exaggerations of the risk this moth poses. The EIR is as flawed as the entire CDFA program to eradicate the light-brown animal moth, and as flawed as this campaign. The spin doctors received $3 million to create an over-dramatized fantasy campaign about hungry pests on the verge of devouring everything green. I could, for no cost at all, suggest that the reality is rather more like this. The CDFA, they're here, and they're hungry. So hungry, they are spending millions to try to convince you to be scared of moth they've been unable to prove is doing any damage in California. So hungry, they are willing to sacrifice the livelihoods of California farmers rather than abandon a campaign of toxic chemicals that is not needed. A chemical campaign that will plague people and our food supply for a long time to come if it is carried out. CDFA has actually taken the course so often taken when facts are not on your side. Just gloss over the truth and promote through fear. I respectfully ask you to oppose this EIR and this entire wasteful and unwarranted program. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chase.
Hi, Senator Florez. Thanks for allowing me to speak today. My name is Glen Chase. I'm a professor of systems management. My specialties are environmental economics and statistics. My expertise is integrating the complex sciences and using the information from the sciences and the constraints of the sciences and managing programs with that information. My observations and conclusions in this situation, in this program, this LBAM program is not a program with a valid goal. The CDFA and USDA effort is a promotion to do the program. Doing the program is the true goal, not eradication. Some examples in line with these conclusions. In 2007, the CDFA announced that, as mentioned today, the window of opportunity to eradicate was just a few short months. It's been almost 2 years now. There's no more mention of that window of eradication. It just continues so the program can go on. It was also mentioned that at that time, aerial spray was the only way to eradicate. There was no alternative. When the court stopped the aerial spray, and the public possibly, immediately thereafter, the aerial spray was dropped and a sterile insect technology became the dominant. And if you look at that, even at this time, that's still in the developmental stage, not even yet in the experimental stage. So they're basing an entire major eradication program on something that's in the development stage, yet examples in Canada where they've tried to use sterile insect technology for a moth that locates exclusively in 3 crop fields was a total failure. And that is so much easier than for LBAM, which locates across the entire state where people live. In other words, if we could eradicate LBAM, we could also eradicate cockroaches, spiders, ants, all the insects that live generally spread across the state, mixed in with humans. They've also announced that the pesticides were registered with the EPA. That was false. The secretary of the CDFA publicly announced for months on end that the pesticide used was non-toxic. During the time that the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, the Department of Pesticide Regulation, and the Department of Public Health had a report out that specifically labeled it as a level 3 toxin. The particles have been mentioned. The particles end up 50% of them are less than 10 microns. What that means is it can go deep into the lung, and from there they're highly likely to get absorbed directly into the bloodstream. And at that point, whether they're toxic or not, simply the size of a particle creates the danger to the systems and the organs in the body. Dan Harder spoke today. When Dan Harder's report first came out, the CDFA, prior to submitting it to their technical staff, they had their public relations person attack it in the media. And so what I'm bringing to your attention is this method. I'm evaluating the management. The method is the program goes forward regardless. Also, the information that was submitted for the reclassification petition, to my understanding 2 weeks ago, has still never yet gotten into the hands of the National Academy of Science. Only their description of it. It's almost like the prosecution delivering to the jury the defense's case while they're not here. And I want to read this to you, the actual statement. It's been mentioned a couple of times today. This is the report, one of the 3 done by the 3 agencies in their conclusion. Quote, "It is not possible to determine whether or not there is a link between any of the reported symptoms and the aerial spray." So that what they're saying is they couldn't tell if there is or there isn't. Immediately afterwards, CDFA falsely reported to the public that the 3 agencies reported there was no link, implying that they hadn't determined, that's what they stated, and then assuring them that we told you so, that this was safe. These are faults again with the management. I want to comment a little bit on the damage inaccuracies. We keep going back to New Zealand. The CDFA took this period that you heard about today when they literally wanted to get rid of the bugs, and they used a broad-based organophosphate, and it killed many bugs. It killed everything in the predators. The CDFA took the cost of applying that broad-based pesticide and represented that as the damage from LBAM in New Zealand, when it had nothing to do with the damage. It had to do with the cost of the spray. They brought that cost to California and escalated it by the number of acres in California, and that's where the CDFA comes up with their potential damage in California, millions of dollars. Prior to the 2 court hearings, I sat through many hearings, meetings throughout the Bay Area, and I heard reports similar to the one we heard today from the fellow in the middle, talking about damage. I've seen pictures of LBAM damage, reports of LBAM damage that were delivered. When all of this information was brought into the court, it was all thrown out of court, and the court had the finding of no damage. There has never been any official damage. The most recent damage, they're talking about caneberry damage in Watsonville, is damage that the CDFA is not allowing the individual farmers to remedy, and then they're attributing that damage to LBAM when there's absolutely no proof that LBAM has any part of it, let alone some particular percentage that would be the case in a legitimate study. So to date, the courts threw out all the claims. The pictures were falsified. When we asked to see the pictures, to get the places and the dates, can you see? They wouldn't submit them. They pulled them back and stopped distributing them. I'm bringing this to your attention because there's a certain standard that generally you would expect to hear when you talk to a certain agency. And when these standards haven't been met, and when a common person would say, this seems to be deception, I would agree. And so we have to look at this agency and the methods in a different light. I've read again in yesterday's press release that this moth can damage over 2,000 plants again. Well, I suppose if you gave me about 2 hours in here, I personally could damage all the chairs in the yard, but I never do. And up to 2,040 plants also includes 0. I want that noted in the record that 0 is included in up to 2,000. My suggestion is a program investigation by an independent agency where the testimony will be under oath, and false testimony will result in perjury charges. This will separate the real scientists at the CDFA from the management at the CDFA, because the staff scientists will not perjure themselves to support the promotion for this program. At this time, the scientists are pressured to promote this program. Very similar to the farmers that you talked. I've talked to a number of farmers over a year ago, and, oh yeah, we need this program, we've got to do it. As I've gotten to know them, and they trust me, and they know that I won't give their names and deliver it in a hearing like this, they now admit to me that this thing is absurd, there's no damage, but that if they're the one that stands out and complains, the inspections and the quarantines and the bullying will put them out of business. And this is the pattern that we've seen over and over and over again. And the people that are, the farming, the growers that are begging for this program are not begging for it to stop the LBAM damage, they're begging for it to get the CDFA off their back. And it's a reasonable response to extortion and to bullying. I want to make a few comments on the items that have been mentioned today. We've talked about hundreds of reported illnesses. Had there been a means for people to report illness, we could say there were hundreds of reported illnesses, but there was no means. The CDFA sprayed and left. So the 643 people that reported, each one took the initiative to find an agency that would even listen to them. Okay, so when we're talking about how many illnesses there were, it's certainly not hundreds. As I mentioned, I teach graduate level statistics in the university. From my personal experience, because I'm very active in this, I've met now slightly over 200 people who felt they got ill from this. Of those, 2 of them reported. So this is certainly not scientific, it was never intended to be a survey, but 2 of about 200, 1 in 100. So if we had 600 reports, we could project that to tens of thousands, somewhere in the area of 60,000 people. And that seems, to be more realistic if you lived in the area of Santa Cruz and you were paying attention. A comment on the rural aerial spraying. There's hardly an area in California that's not within 3.5 miles of a rural area. So when they talk about stopping the aerial spray in the population, that's not candid, because it drifts over 3.5 miles by their measurement. And I don't mean because of the wind, I mean because of the nature of aerial spray. It drifts. So anyone living within 3.5 miles, which is most all of us, of a non-populated area, are still going to be in the aerial spray. It was mentioned here, the official reasons for the birds dying had to do with the red tide and the bacteria in the red tide, and what wasn't mentioned in the report was that same goo that was the bacteria was also inland on the porches and the kayaks and the patios. So unless the water is flowing uphill these days, the problem came from inland into the ocean, not from the ocean in. And that really disappoints me, because the UC professor that wrote this report neglected to put that in his report. And then a lot of other state agencies that are funded, by the same places that this agency is funded by, signed on to that report. Today's CDFA did not attend. I've been attending the meeting since fall of 2007. The pattern has been identical. Unless the CDFA can control the meeting, their people speak, and then the public is limited to 90 seconds or 2 minutes where their questions aren't responded to. They say something, the frustration comes, and they sit there and they let them speak, and then that's it. And so not once since the program started has the CDFA ever sat in the same room with this expert panel that you just sat with and responded so that the common sense, they've only done it on a one-way delivery, and consistently when they've gone up in front of a hearing where they're responsible to respond to someone like yourself, they've always said, we've made some problems with communication, we'll do better to communicate. The problem has not been communication. That's been the excuse for the lack of science. And one example is with all these concerns about this EIR and this program, the one they picked up was the noise from the airplanes. That was the greatest concern. We've talked about why are they doing this? Is their science that bad? Are they stuck in it? They may be, some of them, but I would suggest to you to look at the numbers and recognize that the annual dollars that they will receive into their budget every single year are greater than their current existing general funds budget for all of the programs they've got in every area across the state. That is certainly a significant motivation, as is the pressure from the pesticide companies that are very, very powerful in this state to enter into contracts. And the pesticide company, in the actual activity in Santa Cruz, it was about 85% of the total went to the pesticide company that supplied the Checkmate formula. It was spoken of here about the problems with spraying and doing all these things. The single most important item to handle LBAM is to monitor it. You have to know how many there are. Tortricids, leaf rollers, their population fluctuates, it's cyclical. So most all the time, if you look worldwide, look here, read yourself. This moth like they say, it's a background insect. We'd never know about it if the CDFA hadn't brought it to our attention. So we need to monitor it so when it hits the high cycle, then we watch and see if it does anything. If it does, typically it won't, and typically the methods used for other insects covers the light brown apple moth as it does the hundreds of other leaf rollers that are related to it. But we have to be able to monitor it. When you use the pheromone, you give up the ability to monitor. And as you know, in war and communications, you've got to keep the communication open. And what this does, it closes the communication. And based on the other methods of this management system that CDFA is demonstrating that they want to do, it reflects the same pattern of not wanting that communication, not wanting the monitoring to be seen. That's what it reflects in my expertise. Laird, before leaving office, had a bill passed that rather than a bug coming up and making such a quick decision, we should have an invasive pest commission that looks at these things well in advance and comes up with a plan for them, which theoretically is a great idea. It's a good planning tool. Unfortunately, the commission has been formed. People were put on the commission, and from my opinion, my interpretation of who these people are, they're people that are ready to simply make the decision that CDFA wants in every single invasive pest that comes down the line. And Senator Florez, I want to be a little humorous on this, but your hearing on possibly eliminating the CDFA and certainly affecting and reducing their budget to cooperate with all the agencies that are reducing their budget, since that time, they have gone on an incredibly aggressive offensive campaign to demonstrate that they are indispensable. And the USDA has stepped in a management sense, to contribute. And you've seen examples of that with this Hungry Bug program. You've seen examples of all of a sudden they found more pests since your hearing than they've mentioned in the media for the last few years. And so LBAM is no longer the main one because they've got tremendous opposition. They've made it broad. And the motivation for this campaign was to keep people from bringing invasive pests into the country. Well, if you were going to spend money to do that, it's so obvious that you would spend the money at the airports and at the port of entries and at the people returning from specific countries where those insects come from, rather than to the general population, which a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of which are going to be leaving the country and returning during their memory of this ad campaign. This ad campaign, from a management expertise perspective, is simply to get the people aware that there's these invasive pests, so when they see something like an airplane or a truck with a sprayer, it will desensitize them and give them some understanding of, oh, they must be taking care of this. Now, the CDFA will also mention the hundreds of eggs that each moth puts out. And if you do the math real quickly, you take 100 eggs, and then the next one has 100 eggs, and another 100 eggs, and I don't know, it sounds pretty serious, but let's remember that nature has insects The ones that produce 100 eggs are the ones whose offsprings don't live, and they have to produce 100 to get one to possibly carry on. Humans have a very high rate of continuing the life cycle. That's why we generally only have one. And but the thing is, what bothers me significantly is these are the kind of information with 100 eggs each. And any people that don't understand math can still go 100 times 100 times 100. It's awfully large, awfully quick. The no-action alternative, it's identified as a disaster. It's going to be a catastrophe here. Well, what they've done is they've identified the no-action alternative, but they've continued to keep the quarantines, the inspections, and all the bullying methods they're using on farms with the no-action alternative. The no-action alternative we're looking for is get off their farms and monitor. So I want to be very clear that when you look at this environmental impact report, it has misrepresented the true no-action alternative that all of the people here today have asked for. And I'll finish with one statement of Secretary Kawamura on CBS, an investigative report by Anna Werner, who has done probably the most significant investigation in this. And she asked him to give some substantiation of some information. How do you know this moth's going to do this? How do you, give us some proof. And he says, those of us who believe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
You do know that's all on the record, right?
That's why I'm here.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, let's, we can have Helen, Dr. here, of course, and Michael DeLay come up, and Frank Hager, and then the last two after this now will be Yannick, Phillips, and Gary Laskey.
Thank you. My name is Helen Kozoriz from Stop the Spray, Alameda County. And I'm actually here to read a statement prepared by Don't Spray California, who were unable to attend today's hearing. Don't Spray California represents a group of people living in the LBAM quarantine zone, most of whom are disabled by pesticide poisoning. The continuation of CDFA's LBAM eradication program is a direct personal threat to the health and lives of our communities. Over the last decade of exposing many such government pesticide programs, we have found that false emergencies like the LBAM program are manufactured to secure funding for the agencies involved. USDA recently launched an expensive advertising campaign to convince us that foreign insects will invade if we don't let them apply pesticides. This campaign represents the interests of the pesticide industry, to which invasive species councils have well-established links. Eradication programs are being justified with trap fines, which trigger quarantines and forced pesticide applications. However, increased numbers of insect fines do not reflect that numbers of traps are also increased. Furthermore, consistent fines in massive trapping programs is statistically expected in any naturalized population of insects. Trap fines do not justify eradication programs. Trap fines determine the presence of an insect, not whether it is doing damage, likely to do future damage, or whether the local ecology is keeping it in balance. There is no evidence that LBAM has done any damage. In fact, CDFA continues to receive funding to develop a reliable identification method to identify LBAM. Independent scientists have determined that the LBAM program is not based on sound science. Hundreds of people have reported illness from exposure to pesticides used in the LBAM program. The environmental devastation was obvious to all who witnessed bird and bee deaths, including the worst red tide in decades immediately following aerial applications on the Central Coast. Overwhelming socio-political opposition alone should have ended the LBAM program, according to USDA's own Emergency Programs Manual. Instead, we are forced to pay with our health and taxes for CDFA and USDA's chemical dependence. CDFA and USDA's reliance on monocropping increases vulnerability to pests because such fields lack a biodiverse, self-managing ecosystem. Organic growers rarely worry about pests, but they are targeted and harassed by CDFA and USDA eradication teams. They are forced to bear the brunt of the burden of quarantines with the associated requirement to apply pesticides and destroy their crops or lose their farms and livelihoods of all who work there. Many of the insects we are told to fear have natural cycles where their populations ebb and flow. Eradication and control programs interfere with these cycles and with nature's ability to adapt to change. Nature does not operate according to industry's fiscal cycles. Moreover, the industry's unwillingness to share some of the abundance of the harvest with the ecosystem at large is unrealistic. The insistence that everything grown in a field must go to market is a policy that causes more damage to the environment than any insect ever could. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
My name is Michael Glen. I live in Pacific Grove on the Monterey Peninsula. I'm an individual who was one of the 643 families, it's not individuals, it's families, that were reported, that we contacted Mike Lindbergh back in September of 07 after we were sprayed by Checkmate OLRF, reporting injuries because both my wife and I suffered harm. And coincidentally, well, frankly, the only thing I want to say with that is we believe that the CDFA would be a trustworthy organization back in August of 07 at the end when they said they were going to aerial spray us because it's just a pheromone, it's safe, it's mostly food-based product, and you won't even know we did it. And as an individual, kind of trusting that with some concern, again with a husband with a wife that had suffered from asthma most of her life, we had concern about it. They did spray us. I took her out of town actually to avoid the spray so that she wouldn't have any exposure to it. And without knowing it, the program, their spraying program was extended one night. And we returned that night expecting to be free from what we thought was small risk. And she became very ill as the airplanes bombarded our house. I'm on record with all that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time discussing it. But I do think it's important to come here and put on record that people are harmed. I was harmed, my wife was harmed. I was harmed at the second spray with Checkmate LBAM F. I suffered harm from it, and we personally believe, and I'll stress that word belief because it continually runs through all my studies and research in looking at CDFA and USDA. But I believe that we were harmed and we are still working to recover from the harm of the exposure of these two products. And I also know from talking to other residents of my community that they were harmed. In fact, today I can go around the town and bring the subject up and find people continuing to talk about the harm they've suffered. This harm that says that is reported by CDFA to not have really occurred, leaving that impression. You know, they never talked to any of us. They never called us. They never questioned anything, and we were completely available to them at all times. And that gets kind of frustrating. The other thing we did out of necessity, because we thought after the spray finished the second time that this would be the end of it. But when they came back in December and told us they're returning April of 08 once a month for the next 9 months, for the next 3 to 5 years and aerial spraying us, that left me and my wife with a conclusion of two things. Either I quit, close my business of 38 years in the town and move, or stop them. That's all we had, because we believed that my wife would die as a result of the aerial spraying from our experience with it, which I haven't gone into, if we stayed in the town and let them do it. We started the Coalition of California Cities, my wife and I, in March of 2008 with an idea, kind of a test, kind of an experiment. What if we got cities to pass resolutions in opposition to aerial spraying? Could that even work, and would it have an impact? We didn't know. We started it, and it was amazing to see, and two of them sitting next to me, people I didn't know, that I've since come to know and respect greatly, that went out to their communities and their mayors and requested them to get involved in this issue. And in 3 months, mind you, 3 months, 30 cities and 3 county boards, 90 organizations passed resolutions in opposition to the aerial spray program, and most of them have other questions and doubts and statements as to the continuance of the program by these communities. And as a result, 2.4 million Californians became represented by their local elected officials in opposition to the aerial program. And guess what we discovered? That's belief of consent. That's constitutional. That is the Constitution of the state of California being represented the moment the word belief is brought into the issue. And I understand, by being in contact by representatives in this building, that belief occurred. We then started looking at that experiment. What happened? I didn't know that could happen, but became very shocked and studied. So I started looking back in history, just looking at the Constitution. And I have to admit, I apologize as a citizen of the California for not being involved in this body more than I was in the past. I never was political or active in anything prior to the threat that came to us. And I was wrong, because I've discovered that this nation was founded under the principle that people do have creator-given certain inalienable rights. Not everything's a right, but certain things are inalienable rights. And I own them. They're mine. They were given to me at birth, and nobody in this country or world can take them from me. And I won't let you. And guess what? I've also discovered everybody has the same right that I do. Everybody does. And I've forgotten this. And I'm now to declare again today, I declare my individual certain right given me for health, promised to be protected by sworn oath by every member of this body, including the governor, to protect that right. And that right is above any law, regulation, code, ordinance, executive order, emergency order of the president or the Supreme Court. That is the highest law that we hold and the foundation of this nation. It truly is. I'm sorry I wasn't here to watch and help along the way. I'm here now. And I hope other people, Californians, will wake up. Not to come here and bombard you guys. You guys aren't at fault, as I see. Most of the representatives are trying hard they can. But the people aren't here. Only the organizations, the groups, the lobbies, the companies are here. The individuals aren't here to declare their right. Rights are not made by laws. They're only declared. I declare mine. A few other things just in closing. I'm concerned that throughout this whole process, nothing has been discussed on obtaining my consent to expose me to pesticides and insecticides that were created only solely for the use in agriculture, in fields and in crops, that were never designed to be exposed to humans in their homes or residences or churches or schools or hospitals. Never have they been designed to that. And it's just unbelievable to me that any of us sit here, even at this forum, and discuss, can they do this in our communities? It's outrageous. It's unethical. It's unprofessional. How do you take untested pesticides only declared to believe to be safe. You're back to the word belief because there's no factual evidence. I couldn't find it. I looked, but I've looked for 2 years for the proof. I find Osama El-Lissi, Executive Director, USDA, Invasive Species Program, sitting next to Jackie Spears in San Carlos in September, which was the only forum that we attended where we could ask questions direct, straight on, to any official representative of our system of government and expect an answer. And we asked him, when is testing done on humans with regard to any program you've established today or in the past for any pesticide or insecticide that you've done? When was the testing performed? And Jackie Spears made him answer, and his answer was concurrently with the program, which only confirms our discovery in looking for the facts. It's against the law to test pesticides on humans. In fact, it's so obvious to me that, gee, CDFA will never test pesticides in any of their programs. Because the moment they do, they'll discover the harm that they cause and establish that fact, and that will shut down any program that they care to begin with. Because at this point, we cannot find any pesticide that doesn't have any minor to moderate harm. Their EIR actually even admits to the harm it will cause. And it seems that it's okay to deny my certain individual inalienable right that I own by some legal regulatory process and say that the process exceeds my right. They can ignore my right and cause harm. And a certain amount of harm is okay as long as the economic benefit is greater than the harm caused. That is what they say in their regulatory process when you read it. That's what EPA says when they do their testing of pesticides. They test them with 10 to 15 years after they release them. And what's the test? What's the economic benefit? What's the harm it caused? What if the economic benefit outweighs the harm? It's okay to continue the product. It's outrageous that we even sit here and discuss this kind of exposure. And for that reason, I stand here and declare I will not let CDFA, USDA, or anybody come into my town and expose my body to untested pesticides without my consent. In that statement, the only action I know we can take now, now I'll say one other thing, then I'll quit. Aerial spraying was, without a doubt, the easiest program to develop belief of consent on because it was so simple to show that nobody wanted airplanes flying over their houses. And belief of consent was so easy to develop, we had no idea. In fact, if they want to continue the aerial spraying, it is the greatest platform they can give me. I'll have 5 million people represented in a few more months, and probably within a year at least 10, if they want to continue aerial spraying. I don't want them to do that. I don't want the harm to even be out there to the people, but I invite them to do so because I'd love to get those numbers. Because if I had those numbers, now it's not me, I keep saying I forget. The Coalition of California Cities was nothing but a mirror. We only reflected what the mayors and the city councils did in all these communities. The communities did it. I didn't. We only reported it. It was true. It's real. Mike Lindbergh only wanted me to read one thing. He couldn't be here today. The author of the report reporting the 643 families, which were in there. He basically says the USDA, CDFA, LBAM policy and program have no credibility in the terms of ensuring the public safety because they won't take responsibility for injuries caused by the aerial spraying program of 2007, which 3 other California agencies which 3 other California agencies said could have been harmful to sensitive individuals. Also, the EPA withdrew its exemption of the product that the CDFA used when faced with a lawsuit challenging the product's safety. I understand in May, Checkmate LBAM and OLRF were removed from exemption and banned for use in the LBAM program. Thank you.
Hello, Senator. Frank Ager, President of the North Kozoriz Alliance, 13 Meadow Way in Fairfax. The CDFA continues down the same path they started in 2007, an unnecessary and unsafe eradication program to rid the state of the so-called dreaded light brown apple moth. When the courts shut down their unlawful project last year because of no EIR, they were undaunted. They wanted to hire a consultant to prepare their EIR with the results they wanted, an LBAM eradication program. NTREX was chosen. The NTREX website tells us why they were selected. In NTREX's own words, we can meet or exceed the expectations of our clients to help our clients develop successful projects while meeting the demands associated with ever-changing environmental laws and regulations. This EIR has been predetermined. It's the CDFA's green light for its unsafe and unnecessary eradication program. As we poured over the draft programming EIR, it becomes so obvious that the EIR is not an unbiased independent study document, but rather a sales job for their eradication program. The new pesticide of choice is Hrng bioflake LBAM. Only 2 ingredients are identified, micro-thick and micro-tack. It states no toxicity information exists for micro-thick. It states also that all ingredients in this formulation are on the USPA exempt list. That's exactly what the CDFA told us about Checkmate, and the EPA also told us they were exempt. The impact on salmon, they address it in the draft programmatic EIR. Since the decline of salmon is from many sources, this program's incremental contributions is less than significant. So what they're saying is, we've already lost our salmon, and a little more poison's not going to hurt them. The CDFA is holding our farmers hostage with unlawful quarantines. They have exceeded their lawful authority. The CDFA has become the judge, jury, and executioner. There's basically no crop damage in California. This whole program is about hundreds of millions of dollars of federal dollars to supplement the CDFA's budget. The government is forcing us to close state parks at the same time. The governor is forcing us to close state parks at the same time. His Department of Food and Ag is ignoring the real issues: the health, the safety, the welfare of California residents, the significant adverse impact on our land, our water, and our farmers. When we challenged Checkmate in federal court in San Francisco in November, the EPA, rather than prove Checkmate was safe, withdrew its previously approved exemption. As it turns out, the CDFA said Checkmate was safe. By law, it could not be sprayed, but by law, it could not be sprayed on conventional crops, let alone organic crops. The sterile insect technique is bizarre. Take the Sonoma Napa focus test that they want to do. Dumping 1,400 moths per acre weekly over 3,000 acres for 27 weeks will put 113 million irradiated moths along the Sonoma-Napa border. The CDFA will create the problem where none exists. California has been presented with a programmatic EIR that is woefully inadequate. I will copy your office with the North Coast Rivers Alliance comments on that draft. Thank you very much, Senator.
Senator Florez, thank you very much for hosting us and your staff for preparing and hosting this great hearing. My name is Yannick Phillips from Sonoma County. I'm a third-generation Californian where my grandparents farmed citrus in Fallsbrook, and I'm a fierce supporter of California agriculture. I am here today on behalf of the farmers, the growers, the nursery owners, the farmers market managers, agricultural commissioners not present in this room to give testimony. They are not here today in fear of retaliation from CDFA. They're not present in this hearing to state their real opinion, and that is that LBAM is not a significant threat to California agriculture. As stated by numerous farmers, CDFA is a nuisance to them with their restrictive quarantines. And from the Ag Commissioner's perspective, CDFA's LBAM eradication program is and will continue to be a tremendous burden with additional paperwork and inspections to each Ag Commissioner who encounters LBAM in their counties, taking Ag Commissioners away from truly doing their job to support our farmers. In the past, I've called dozens of New Zealand growers, farmers, governmental officials, New Zealand entomologists who state, and I quote, LBAM is not an issue. This insect is like aphids. It's insignificant. And recently, with the Watsonville berry perceived damage, recently I've contacted New Zealand caneberry farmers, apricot farmers, cherry, blueberry, strawberry farmers, and they all state, and I quote, I don't think we have this insect here. You are wasting your time calling me, and LBAM is not an issue here. And there's others. CDFA needs to take each insect case by case, and we need to nip this eradication program in the bud. In closing, I would like to invite the Farm Bureau. I spoke to Chris, I think Chris Hrng is his name, outside this room. I'd like to invite the Farm Bureau, the Nurserymen's Association, the Fruit and Vegetable Commissions, and in fact, all the agricultural interests under the Consoirs and Conway, as well as the Western growers, that we demand together protection for their members and demand that CDFA push the USDA to reclassify LBAM, as well as urge them to unify with our trading partners and have LBAM immediately become a non-actionable insect. Those of us who are fierce advocates for California agriculture would like to focus and deal with the real issues at hand for our farmers, and that's water and their current financial hardship. So to CDFA, while you would like to have us believe that a $3 million media campaign, Hungry Pests, and millions of dollars for LBAM eradication program is needed, many of us believe you are wasting tax dollars and putting fear into California citizens and putting our state's greatest assets in great jeopardy, that being our farmers. Let me just say a couple more things. To Chris from the Farm Bureau, in Sonoma, grape growers have told me that they are spraying more pesticides, not because LBAM is a threat, but because they're scared to death of being quarantined. So it's not necessarily that citizens on their property is going to be spraying more. The farmers now are scared to death to be quarantined. They're spraying more. And Senator Florez, since my testimony is on record, I would also, for the record, like to state to CDFA that I and Sonoma County will not allow CDFA's LBAM eradication program to enter my county. They have my word on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for this wonderful presentation and for taking your lunch hour. So I'll keep my remarks brief.
Okay.
My name is Gary Laskey. I live at 4677 North Stafford Avenue in Fresno. Fresno County has hundreds of farmers, and our commercial crops were worth more than $4.8 billion in 2006, according to our County Farm Bureau. I wish to make 2 points here today. First, an LBAM quarantine would hurt farmers in Fresno County and create a huge burden for our county's agricultural commissioner, who's responsible for overseeing hundreds of farms with a very limited staff. Second, the LBAM aerial spray program has created a legacy of mismanagement and damaged the ability of the state to proceed with any further LBAM eradication methods. This is due to a loss of public trust in CDFA and the state government in general. This programmatic EIR only compounds this mistrust because, as we've heard today, it basically relies on the same non-scientific bases that it relies on to produce these conclusions. We've heard of the environmental damage from the aerial spray to seabirds, pets, and other wildlife where I lived in Santa Cruz. But the damage from the aerial spray is not limited to just these impacts. There's lasting political damage to the credibility of the state of California. The state is responsible for a panicked population. That's not an exaggeration. As it continues to insist that the spray is merely a benign activity, I know Santa Cruz residents who continue to live in a sustained state of high anxiety at the thought that they could be exposed to the aerial spray in the future. This mistrust by the public extends beyond CDFA to state government. So, in fact, CDFA could not more effectively unravel popular support for government if it set out to try to do it. So CDFA is now calling for the use of the other benign methods, quote, to contain the LBAM, but in this state of crisis, this crisis of credibility, the public is really not prepared to buy whatever they're told. The outrage and fears, they feel like they're human guinea pigs. These are justified until the state begins to recognize the precautionary principle. As a final point, I'm disturbed to see a pattern from CDFA and other government agencies in the state that attempt to evade the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. The environmental review process in general. CDFA attempted to use the so-called emergency situation to rush through this eradication program without an EIR before. Now we learn that the science for such a campaign is lacking. It's a bedrock principle of the California Environmental Quality Act that an EIR must examine a wide range of options when considering a proposed project, including the no project, no program option. The no project option always evaluates existing conditions. This is the only way to develop a baseline so we can know what the incremental impact of a project will be. As we've heard, the no program option in this EIR states that what will be widespread use of the organophosphates, which is speculative. Technically, you would say, okay, that could be another possibility, but it's not the no project option. Another core principle of CEQA is that the EIR needs a stable and consistent scope in order to evaluate the impact of the project. This is lacking from the LBAM EIR as well. We really have no idea where the spray would occur. We don't know its scope. There's no definition of urban or rural. And in my studied opinion, I've studied environmental law for 15 years, this EIR does not stand up to close scrutiny. In conclusion, the public and the reputation of government have been harmed by the CDFA LBAM program. This damage is lasting in terms of credibility, and the LBAM programmatic EIR lacks the most basic elements required by CEQA. We need to rein in an executive agency that ignores and distorts good science in favor of scare tactics, the shock doctrine, as an excuse to bypass basic environmental safeguards embodied in California environmental law. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to close the hearing. It is 12:10. We started at 9:10, and it was very extensive. And I do appreciate everyone's comments on the record. I would ask the sergeants, if possible, along with staff, to expedite the transcript of this, if we could. Very, very important, and make sure it's online on our sites here in the Senate. And then we will. I'd like to see if I could hand carry that to the Secretary myself and have a discussion with him about some of the recommendations put forth here. I'm sure I won't jeopardize any litigation in talking to our Secretary as the chair of the Food and Ag Committee in the Senate, but I would like to have the transcript in hand, and I'd like to get his comments back on the transcript itself to questions that were raised here. That would be very important. And I will say also thank you for traveling and being here. I want you to know that this is not one of those hearings where we are trying to, in essence, get ahead of an issue that's extremely popular. What we're trying to do is to find a more credible way to deal with this and other issues in the future. And there's lots of good recommendations here. And I do want to thank the folks that came from the academics as well, who have given us more than ample evidence, having worked for CDFA for quite a bit, that we are headed down the wrong path and expending a lot of money and effort and time doing this, that sometimes you have to pull the plug on things, and you have to start over, and hopefully this will give us an opportunity to credibly put our control programs on a better path. And this has been extremely helpful. I do want to thank everyone for putting your comments on the record. I think you always find better solutions once you read the transcript. I don't know how, but every time I've reviewed a transcript, you catch things you didn't catch at the hearing, and it leads to more questions. So I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to do that, and we're going to adjourn the Senate Food and Agriculture Committee, and then we will see you somewhere before September 28th to go over all of this. So we'll notice everyone, but we'll hopefully be back here with the Secretary and others. It's hard to jeopardize the EIR the day before the due date, so let's make sure we do that. Okay, so we'll adjourn the hearing. Thank you.